Suddenly, a runaway train hurtles towards the station.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down 10 of the worst train disasters in history.
I heard an explosion, and when I arrived, one of the carriages was already over the road that comes out from there.
There's no survivor. You survive or you burn.
It was Taiwan's worst rail accident in recent history. That was until today.
For this list, we're discussing railway accidents that tragically involved the loss of human life, as well as extensive damages and casualties. While we are discussing those incidents with the biggest overall impact, we'll be excluding mechanical-only disasters like fires or spills that did not result in any casualties. While these disasters are undeniably devastating, we're hopeful that improvements made to the safety protocols in the industry following such events have ultimately made a difference and prevented further loss of life. Number 10. The El Ayat Railway Accident. An accident shrouded in secrecy and false reports, the El Ayat rail disaster has a death toll that many still consider to be a vast understatement. While traveling from Cairo to Luxor, a cooking gas cylinder on the overcrowded passenger train exploded. 7 of the rear carriages went up in flames, burning for over 2 hours before the conductor of the train became aware of the blaze. Because of the intensity and the amount of time the fire was allowed to burn, many bodies were reduced to ash and unable to be identified. Though the reported death toll was 383, a missing passenger list and overcrowded train cars have led others to believe that a number closer to 1,000 deaths is more accurate. Number 9. The Awash Rail Disaster. Sadly, it seems like the express train involved in this derailment was already tempting fate before it reached its watery grave. If reports are to be believed, the Ethiopian train was massively overcrowded on January 13, 1985. Traveling from the eastern city of Dir Dawa to the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa via the Ethio-Djibouti Railway, the alleged 1,000-strong passenger train ran off its rails while it was passing over the Awash River. While on the curving bridge over the gorge, the rear carriage, followed by 3 other of the train's carriages, derailed and sent everyone into the water. With the official death toll stated at 428 and over 500 more injuries reported, this was and continues to be the most fatal train crash Africa has ever seen. Number 8. The Balvano Train Disaster. Italy's deadliest railway accident occurred between March 2nd and March 3rd, 1944 during World War II. Many big city residents were trading food for goods and services at the time, but could only get farm-fresh produce by illegally hitching rides on freight trains. Beginning in Naples, coal-burning freight train 8017 made multiple stops on its way to Potenza, but the number of stowaways it was carrying was too much for it to bear. After departing the Balvano Riccigliano station, the train's wheels had difficulty entering the army tunnel and eventually slowed so that most of the train was stopped inside. The failed attempts to get it going again, combined with the carbon monoxide smoke from a previous one, led to much of the staff and the passengers, over 517 people, to be fatally poisoned. Number 7. The Ufa Train Disaster. This is the rail disaster with the most casualties to have ever happened during peacetime in the Soviet Union or Russia. Despite being named after Bashkir ASSR's largest city, the railway accident took place in Iglinski district, which is over 30 miles east of Ufa. During the early morning of June 4, 1989, 2 Kuibyshev railway passenger trains exploded following a gas pipeline leak. Carrying both adults and children, they were traveling in different directions between Novosibirsk and Adler when a gas cloud was set alight by the train's wheel sparks, triggering an explosion with an energy output guessed to be as high as 10 kilotons TNT equivalent. Officially, 575 died, while unofficially, it's 780, most in hospital. Meanwhile, more than 800 sustained injuries. Number 6. The Guadalajara Train Disaster. At the height of the Mexican Revolution, rebel leader Venustiano Carranza earned a strategic victory at the city of Guadalajara. Families of rebel troops were immediately piled onto a train to be moved to the city, overcrowding to the point that travelers were holding on from the outside and underside of the carriages. On the way to Guadalajara, navigating a series of steep curves, the train's brakes failed, and the carriages began to gather speed, throwing some of the unsecured passengers to their deaths. The journey ended with the train derailing, going off the tracks and into a canyon, with the estimated death toll recorded at over 600. Number 5. The Veryshevka train disaster. The ongoing Second World War often meant a lack of time, manpower, and supplies, all of which probably contributed to what was Russia's most fatal train disaster. A few hours after a heavy freight train pushed a wooden bridge close to its limits on January 24, 1944, a Vyazma-Bryansk train crossed the same temporary structure over a newish lake in the then Soviet Union's federal subject of Oryol Oblast. With both soldiers and civilians on board, the passenger train was traveling through what is now Russia's Dyatkovsky district when the engineer-built bridge's supports broke open. Unfortunately, the frozen lake underneath couldn't hold the load of the approximately 600 to 700 passengers that fell onto it, and cracked with the weight. An official death toll was never made public. Number 4. The Bihar train derailment. While traveling to the Indian city of Saharsa, a passenger train carrying over 800 people derailed while crossing a bridge over the Bagmati River. With the strong currents, many of the bodies were never recovered, assumed to be washed away by the river. Curiously, the official cause of the derailment of the passenger train in Bihar has never been settled upon. Guesses include that the train was blown off the tracks by a cyclone, flash flooding destabilized the bridge, or even that the brakes failed as the railroad engineer attempted to avoid hitting a water buffalo. With an estimated 500 to 800 deaths, the Bihar train disaster is one of the deadliest on record. Number 3. The Saint-Michel de Maurienne derailment. Over 1,000 French soldiers were granted leave from the Italian front during World War I to visit home for Christmas in 1917. Not enough trains were available to provide safe transport, so 19 carriages were hitched to a single engine, and the train overcrowded with desperate troops. Though the engineer initially refused to undertake the journey due to the obvious safety concerns, a French officer reportedly threatened him at gunpoint until he was forced to relent. On a steep descent, the brakes failed due to the heavy load, with the first few carriages derailing and causing a pileup and fire. Because of the flames, many of the over 700 bodies could not be identified, with the accident itself kept classified by the French military for years. Number 2. The Chura rail disaster, also known as the Chura catastrophe. Due to the fact that there was never any official investigation, this remains one of the more mysterious rail accidents ever recorded. After entering a downward slope, the passenger train dubbed the Courier experienced brake failure, derailing as it hit speeds of 59 miles per hour and crashing into another stopped locomotive. One of the carriages of the stopped train was speculated to contain fuel, sparking a fire that engulfed the Courier and the engine it had hit, with most casualties coming as a result of the fire or the initial impact. With few newspapers reporting and no actual investigation launched, the details of the crash remain fuzzy and speculative, with the estimated death toll at between 800 to 1,000 lives lost. Before we unveil our top pick, here are some honorable mentions. The Saint-Hilaire train disaster. Deaths, 99. The Torre del Bierzo rail disaster. Deaths, between 78 and 100. The Firozabad rail disaster. Deaths, 358. The Nishapur rail disaster. Deaths, 295. The Chengdu Kunming rail crash. Deaths, between 240 to 360. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Number 1. The Sri Lanka tsunami train wreck. The deadliest rail disaster in recorded history. The loss of the Queen of the Sea resulted in over 900 official casualties, with an estimated 1,700 lives lost in total. During the 2004 tsunami that rocked Sri Lanka, the Queen of the Sea train departed from Ambalangoda and could not be reached by emergency personnel with warnings to stop. As waves crashed inland, the train was stopped on the tracks, surrounded by water. Seeking refuge and assuming the train to be secure, many locals crowded and clung to the carriage, with water levels rising and flooding the interior of the train, preventing doors from being opened. Most of the casualties came as a result of drowning or being thrown from the carriage and crushed by debris.
Do you agree with our picks? Check out this other recent clip from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.